All right, buckle up, because today we're diving deep into something you specifically requested.
Oh, yeah.
Boosting your vocabulary.
Yes.
For more fluent and confident English.
It's going to be good.
Now, before you panic, we're not expecting you to memorize the entire dictionary.
Not at all. This is about those key words, the kind that can make a real difference in how you express yourself, especially in those situations you mentioned where you want to feel more confident and articulate.
Exactly. And luckily, the source material we're using is super organized with 60 powerful words.
Wow.
Grouped into 6 helpful categories.
I like it.
Though it is kind of funny that the source itself is structured like a podcast episode.
Very meta.
Yeah.
But we'll skip those instructions and jump right into the good stuff.
Okay, let's unpack this first category, expressing opinions.
Okay.
The first word that jumps out at me is concur.
Ooh.
It just sounds so much more decisive than a plain old I agree, you know?
Absolutely. Concur implies you've actually considered the information and come to a thoughtful agreement, which could be especially powerful, say, in a professional setting,
Right.
where you want to project competence.
Oh, that's a good point. It's not just about using fancy words. It's about choosing the right word to convey the specific message you want.
Exactly. And speaking of conveying messages, the next word, imply, reminds me of something you mentioned. You said you sometimes struggle to give feedback delicately.
Oh, yeah.
Well, imply could be your secret weapon there.
Ooh, tell me more.
So instead of directly criticizing, you can imply your suggestion.
Okay.
For example, instead of saying, that report was too long,
Right.
you could say, I wonder if the report's key points could be summarized more concisely.
Oh.
You're implying that it needs to be shorter without directly saying it.
That's brilliant. It softens the criticism while still getting the message across. I can definitely see myself using that.
See, it's all about understanding the nuances of these words and how they can be applied in real-life situations.
Okay, I'm starting to get really excited about this. What else do we have in this category?
Well, we have refute, which is perfect for dismantling a flimsy argument. Politely, of course.
Right.
Remember those meetings where someone proposes an idea that just doesn't hold up?
Oh, I know those meetings all too well.
Refute allows you to disagree respectfully while presenting evidence or logic to back up your stance.
So instead of just saying, I disagree, I could say something like, I understand your point, but I'd like to refute it by presenting these statistics.
Exactly. It shows that you've considered the other perspective, but have a well-reasoned counter-argument. Very effective.
Okay, I'm loving these words already. Now, what about this pair, imply and infer? I always get those mixed up.
Ah, yes, a classic linguistic conundrum. Remember that example we just discussed about implying feedback?
Yes.
Well, if someone inferred from your subtle suggestion that the report needed to be shorter,
Right.
that would be on them drawing a conclusion from what you implied.
Okay, so imply is on the speaker side and infer is on the listener side. Got it.
You got it. Now, there's another word of this category that I think would be particularly useful for you.
Okay.
Assert. You mentioned wanting to be more vocal in meetings, right?
Oh, yes. Sometimes I feel like I fade into the background a bit.
Well, assert is your power word. Imagine yourself saying, I want to assert that we need to prioritize user experience in this project.
Wow. I can already feel the difference. Assert just has this air of confidence and conviction.
Exactly. It shows that you're not afraid to speak your mind and that you believe in the value of your contributions.
This is fantastic. I'm already feeling more empowered to express my opinions effectively. Okay, what's next on our vocabulary adventure?
Let's move on to personal qualities. This category is all about the words that describe who we are at our core.
Ooh, this sounds intriguing and a little bit introspective, perhaps.
Absolutely. For example, we have meticulous,
Okay.
which describes someone who pays incredible attention to detail.
Right.
Now, thinking back to your work, I know you take pride in delivering high-quality results. Would you say meticulous is a word that resonates with you?
Definitely. I'm always striving for perfection, whether it's editing a script or organizing an event.
So owning that word and using it to describe your work ethic could really enhance how others perceive your strengths. You could say something like, I'm meticulous in my approach to project management, ensuring that every detail is accounted for.
I love that. It's not just about sounding smart, it's about accurately representing my skills and values.
Precisely. And speaking of values, the next word, resilient, is one that I think we can all relate to.
Oh, absolutely. Life throws curveballs, and it's all about how we bounce back.
Exactly. Resilience isn't about avoiding challenges.
Right.
It's about having the inner strength to overcome them.
Mm-hmm.
And remember that setback you told me about how you handled that difficult client situation?
Oh, yeah.
That's a perfect example of your resilience in action.
You know, you're right. I never thought of it that way, but I did manage to navigate that situation effectively and learn from the experience.
Exactly. So when you encounter future challenges, remember that experience and the strength you demonstrated. That's what resilience is all about.
Wow, this is really powerful stuff. I'm starting to see how These words aren't just about expanding my vocabulary, they're about reframing my thinking and recognizing my own strengths.
That's exactly the point. Now, before we move on, I noticed that candid appears in two categories:
Oh.
personal qualities and sophisticated conversations. I wonder what that tells us about the importance of honesty.
That's interesting. Maybe being candid is more valuable than we sometimes realize, both in our personal lives and in those more complex discussions.
It's definitely something to ponder. So before we delve into those sophisticated conversations, let's take a moment to reflect. If you had to choose 3 words from this personal qualities list to describe yourself, which ones would you pick and why?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think I would choose meticulous, resilient, and maybe insightful. I feel like those words really capture my approach to work and life in general.
Those are excellent choices. And they highlight the power of owning those qualities and using them to your advantage.
All right, I'm ready to dive into the next category, words for making conversations sound more sophisticated. But I have to admit, I sometimes feel a little silly using big words in casual conversations. Like, will people think I'm trying too hard?
I understand that concern, but think of it this way. These words aren't about showing off.
Right.
They're about expressing yourself more precisely and vividly. It's like having a wider range of colors to paint with.
Okay, that's a helpful analogy. So it's less about sounding smart and more about using the right tool for the job.
Exactly. For instance, the word ubiquitous. Yes, it sounds a bit academic, but it's also incredibly useful for describing something that's everywhere. Like, remember how we were talking about that new social media app everyone's using?
Oh, yeah? The one that's suddenly taken over all my feeds?
Instead of just saying it's everywhere, you could say, that app has become ubiquitous. It just adds a touch of sophistication and precision.
You're right, it elevates the language a bit without sounding pretentious. Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal. What other sophisticated words do we have here?
Well, there's ephemeral,
Okay.
which describes something fleeting or short-lived.
Right.
Now, think about that feeling you describe when a really great book ends, or when you finish a project you've poured your heart into.
Oh, I know that feeling well. A mix of satisfaction and a little bit of sadness that it's over.
Exactly. It's a bittersweet feeling, and ephemeral captures that perfectly. You could say the joy of finishing that project was wonderful, but also somewhat ephemeral.
That's beautiful. I'll definitely be adding ephemeral to my vocabulary arsenal.
And, it doesn't have to be reserved for deep philosophical discussions. You could even use it to describe something as simple as a beautiful sunset.
Oh, that's true. The sunset's colors were vibrant yet ephemeral. I love it.
See, these words can add depth and richness to any conversation, even everyday ones. Now, what about notorious? It's a fun one.
Ooh, yes. It's like that restaurant is notorious for its terrible service, or that politician is notorious for flip-flopping on issues.
Exactly. It conveys a sense of infamy or bad reputation, adding a little bit of spice to your storytelling.
Okay, I'm ready to move on to the next category, words for work and professional settings. I'll be honest, I initially thought I could skip this section since I'm not in a super corporate environment.
That's a common misconception. While these words might be frequently used in offices, understanding them can be valuable in any setting where you're collaborating with others.
You're right. For example, delegation. It's not just about bosses assigning tasks. It's about effectively distributing responsibilities in any group project, even planning a volunteer event or a community initiative.
Exactly. Understanding delegation can help you be a more effective leader even in informal settings. And then there's facilitate, which is such a useful word for anyone who wants to help things run smoothly.
Oh, I love facilitate. It's like I want to facilitate a brainstorming session where everyone feels comfortable sharing their ideas.
Exactly. It implies a sense of guidance and support, creating an environment where everyone can contribute effectively. Now, I know you mentioned sometimes feeling overwhelmed by group projects. Delegation and facilitate are perfect examples of words that can empower you to take charge and guide those projects towards success.
Wow, that's a really empowering perspective. I'm already feeling more confident about handling those collaborative situations.
And even a word like synergy, which might make you roll your eyes a bit.
Oh, definitely. It's such a buzzword.
It is. But putting aside the corporate jargon, the underlying concept is actually quite valuable. Synergy is about recognizing that the combined effort of a group can be greater than the sum of its individual parts.
Okay, when you put it that way, it does make sense. It's about the power of collaboration and how different skills and perspectives can come together to create something truly amazing.
Exactly. And that's a powerful concept to understand regardless of your work environment.
All right, I'm starting to see the value in these work and professional settings words. They might not be the most glamorous, but they are incredibly useful for clear communication and effective teamwork.
And speaking of clear communication, let's move on to a category that's all about expressing ourselves authentically, emotions and reactions. This is where things get really interesting.
Oh, I love this category. These words are so much more nuanced and evocative than just saying, happy or sad.
Exactly. It's like having a whole spectrum of colors to describe the complexities of human emotion. For example, exasperated. It perfectly captures that feeling of utter frustration and annoyance, like when you're dealing with a never-ending queue or a computer that just won't cooperate.
Oh, tell me about it. I felt that way just this morning when I was trying to book a flight online and the website kept crashing.
I can imagine it's much more specific and vivid than just saying annoyed, right?
Absolutely. And then there's elated. It's not just happy, it's a feeling of pure joy and exhilaration, like when you achieve a long-awaited goal or receive wonderful news.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that understanding a wider range of emotion words can actually help us to better regulate our own emotions.
Oh, how so?
When we can accurately label our emotions, we can start to understand the triggers that cause them and develop strategies for coping with challenging situations.
That's so true. If I can pinpoint exactly what I'm feeling, it's easier to figure out how to address the issue or shift my mindset. It's like having a roadmap for my own emotional well-being.
Exactly. It's about becoming more emotionally intelligent, both in understanding ourselves and in empathizing with others.
Okay, this is fascinating. So it's not just about expressing ourselves, it's about understanding the emotions behind the words.
Precisely. And speaking of understanding, how are you feeling right now?
Let me see. I think I'm feeling a mix of intrigued and inspired. This deep dive is really opening my eyes to the power of language.
That's wonderful to hear, and it's a perfect example of how expanding our vocabulary can enhance our self-awareness and emotional intelligence.
All right, I'm excited to explore our final category, words for everyday conversations. These are the words we use all the time, but maybe we could be using them more effectively.
Exactly. It's about refining our everyday language to express ourselves with greater clarity and impact. For example, the word tedious. We all have those tasks or activities that we find boring and repetitive.
Oh, absolutely. Filing paperwork, cleaning the bathroom, waiting on hold. The list goes on.
Exactly. But instead of just saying, ugh, this is so boring, you could say, this paperwork is incredibly tedious. It just adds a touch of eloquence to your complaint.
Huh, I love that. It's like elevating the art of complaining.
Precisely. And then we have substantial.
Okay.
Which is a word you can use to describe something significant or meaningful.
Right.
It could be a substantial meal, a substantial accomplishment, or even a substantial improvement in your communication skills.
Ooh, I like that. It adds a sense of weight and importance.
Exactly. And finally, we have inevitable, which is a great word to use when discussing trends or events that seem certain to happen.
Like, it's inevitable that technology will continue to advance at a rapid pace, or it's inevitable that this cake will be devoured in minutes.
Huh. Both excellent examples.
You know, I'm really impressed with how versatile these everyday conversations words are. They might seem simple at first glance, but they can add so much depth and nuance to our everyday language.
Exactly. It's all about choosing the right words to convey our thoughts and feelings with precision and clarity. And remember, this deep dive is just the beginning of your vocabulary journey.
That's right. It's about continually exploring language, experimenting with new words, and finding those hidden gems that allow us to express ourselves more authentically and effectively.
And who knows, maybe one day you'll be the one casually dropping ephemeral and ubiquitous into everyday conversations, leaving everyone in awe of your eloquence.
Huh, I wouldn't mind that, but seriously, this has been such an eye-opening experience. I'm feeling inspired to pay more attention to my language and to embrace the power of words.
That's fantastic. And remember, the journey of language exploration is a lifelong adventure. There's always something new to learn, and the possibilities for expression are endless.
You know, as we wrap up this deep dive into powerful vocabulary,
Right.
I think it's important to remember that this isn't just about sounding smarter.
Absolutely, it's about so much more than that.
Right. We've talked about how the right words can help you be more persuasive in meetings,
Yes.
give feedback more delicately, even navigate those tricky group projects you mentioned.
Precisely. A richer vocabulary is like having a sharper set of tools. It allows you to express yourself with more nuance and precision, whether you're writing an email,
Right.
giving a presentation,
Right.
or just having a casual conversation.
It's like the difference between using a bull knife and a razor-sharp one.
Oh,
You can still get the job done with the dull knife, but the sharp one makes it so much easier and the results are so much cleaner.
I love that analogy. And just like with any skill building, a strong vocabulary takes practice.
Totally, but it's not about memorizing a bunch of fancy words and then awkwardly shoehorning them into every sentence.
Definitely not. It's about understanding the subtle shades of meaning, the context in which certain words are most effective,
Right.
and then using them in a way that feels natural and authentic to you.
So it's not just about the quantity of words we know, it's about the quality of our understanding and how we use them.
Exactly. And that's where the real power lies.
So, dear listener, as we wrap out this deep dive,
Okay.
we want to encourage you to embrace the journey of language exploration.
Don't be afraid to pick up a dictionary, browse through a thesaurus, or even just pay close attention to the language used in books, articles, and conversations.
And remember, even incorporating just one new word from this deep dive into your regular vocabulary can make a noticeable difference.
It's like adding a new color to your palette, a new spice to your cooking, a new tool to your toolbox.
And who knows, maybe you'll inspire someone else to start paying more attention to their own language.
Exactly. And that's how we create a ripple effect, raising the level of communication and understanding for everyone.
So with that in mind, we encourage you to go out there and experiment with your newfound vocabulary. Don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yes.
To play with words and to discover the endless possibilities of expression.
Because the power of language is within your grasp, and the journey of learning is one that never truly ends.
That wraps up our deep dive into powerful English vocabulary. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration and that you'll continue to discover the magic and the power of word.
Until next time, happy communicating. All right, so are you ready to boost your English fluency?
Yeah, always.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into idioms and phrasal verbs, going way beyond the basics.
Yeah, even advanced learners can trip up on these.
They can be tricky.
They really can.
But think about it like this. You've got the grammar down pat, you've got a solid vocabulary, but now you really want to sound natural like a native speaker.
Right.
That's where these idioms and phrasal verbs really come into play. They're like those secret ingredients that just add so much flavor.
And you know what? We've got a fantastic selection for you today, pulled from a 3-hour workshop. We've condensed it down to like the juiciest, most essential parts.
Yeah, we're going to break down these expressions, look at all those little subtle nuances, and by the end of this deep dive, you'll not only understand them, but you'll be able to use them confidently.
Yeah, that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
To actually use them.
Exactly.
All right.
So let's jump right in with an idiom that's all about approaching information with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Okay.
Take it with a grain of salt.
I love that one.
It's so good, right? So let's say you've got a colleague who's known for embellishing stories just a little bit. You might say something like, he tends to exaggerate, so take his stories with a grain of salt.
It's a really nice way to express caution, without like directly accusing somebody of, figging.
Right.
You're basically saying, yeah, I'm listening, but I'm also keeping in mind that this might not be the whole truth.
And it's so important, I think, especially these days where we're just bombarded with information from all sides.
Yeah, we have to be really careful about what we believe.
Right.
Take it with a grain of salt. It's like a little reminder to pause, think critically before we just accept anything as like the absolute truth.
That's so important. So let's shift gears a little bit to a more lighthearted idiom, spill the beans.
Oh, I love this one.
This is when someone reveals a secret,
Yeah.
often unintentionally, like that classic surprise party scenario.
Yeah, somebody let the cat out of the bag.
Right, it's usually used in a playful, kind of teasing way, not like a serious accusation.
It's like, oh, come on, you can tell me, I won't be mad.
Exactly. I think spill the beans is a perfect example of how idioms can inject humor into language.
Yeah, it's so much more fun than just saying reveal a secret.
Right.
It just adds that little bit of personality.
Okay, so next up we've got an idiom that's all about flexibility. Play it by ear.
Oh, this is a good one.
And this one comes in handy when you're not really sure what the plan is or, things are subject to change.
Yeah.
Like, let's say you're meeting up his friends for dinner, but the restaurant's packed.
Oh, yeah.
What do you say?
Let's just play by ear. We'll see if we can get a table or maybe try somewhere else close by.
Exactly. It's all about being adaptable and going with the flow.
Yeah, that's a really important skill to have,
So important.
especially when things are, changing all the time.
Right. Playing it by ear lets you adjust those plans and make decisions as you go.
Makes sense.
Okay, so now let's talk about an idiom that's often used when someone's avoiding the main point or being a little evasive beat around the bush.
Oh, I don't like when people do that.
Have you ever noticed how some people just dance around a topic instead of getting straight to the point?
It's frustrating.
It is frustrating.
Yeah.
Like, imagine you're asking a friend about something kind of sensitive,
Right.
but they just keep talking about everything else except what you want to know.
You want to say, just stop beating around the bush.
Right, tell me what's going on.
What's the deal?
Exactly. It's important, though, to pay attention to the context and the speaker's tone.
Yeah.
Sometimes people beat around the bush because they're uncomfortable or nervous.
Or maybe they're trying to protect someone's feelings.
Right. It's not always about being intentionally evasive.
Right.
Sometimes it's just about finding the right words or approaching a difficult conversation with sensitivity.
That makes sense.
That leads us to an idiom that's all about neutrality, sit on the fence.
Ah, yes.
This one describes someone who's hesitant to choose a side.
They can't make up their mind.
They just can't decide. So picture a heated debate, right? Two people are arguing passionately for these opposed viewpoints.
They're going at it.
But then there's that one person who's just sitting there undecided, carefully weighing those pros and cons.
They're on the fence.
They're sitting on the fence.
Yeah.
And you know what? It can be frustrating if you're looking for a clear commitment.
Yeah, I want to know what side you're on.
Right.
But sometimes, it's good to gather more information before you make a decision.
Right. Sometimes it's a sign of being thoughtful and careful.
Yeah, you want to consider all the angles.
Exactly.
Before you jump in.
Okay, let's move on to an idiom that I think we can all relate to: bite off more than you can chew.
Oh, yeah, I've been there.
I know we've all been there, especially when it comes to like new challenges or those ambitious goals.
Yeah, it's that feeling of, oh, I can totally do this. And then you realize,
What have I gotten myself in?
I have way too much on my plate.
I remember once trying to learn 3 languages at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Talk about biting off more than I could chew.
Yeah, that's ambitious.
It was fun and challenging, but I quickly realized I needed to scale back.
Yeah, one at a time.
One at a time.
It's easy to get caught up in that initial excitement.
Right.
But we have to be realistic about our time and, what we can actually handle.
Biting off more than you can do can lead to burnout.
And stress.
And you might not even reach your goals.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's better to start small, build a solid foundation, and then gradually take on more.
One step at a time.
One step at a time.
Yeah.
And speaking of taking shortcuts, let's talk about an idiom that often has a bit of a negative connotation: cut corners.
Uh-oh.
This suggests doing something in a hasty or incomplete way to save time or money, but it can compromise quality.
Yeah, you end up sacrificing something important.
Imagine a construction company trying to finish a project quickly and cheaply.
Right, they might use cheaper materials.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
skip some safety checks.
And those consequences could be huge.
Yeah.
It's like a reminder that sometimes it's worth investing that extra time and effort to do things properly.
In the long run, it pays off.
Now let's talk about trends. Jump on the bandwagon.
Oh, I see this all the time.
All the time, especially with like fashion technology, social media. A new trend pops up and everybody's doing it.
Everyone wants to be part of it.
It's that fear of missing out.
Yeah, that FOMO.
Right. But it's important to remember you don't always have to follow the crowd.
You can make your own choices.
Think critically and do what actually interests you.
Yeah, what aligns with your values.
Exactly. Okay, let's lighten things up again with a playful idiom: pull someone's leg.
Oh, I love this one.
This one's all about teasing in a good-natured way.
Yeah, just a little bit of fun.
Like, I'm just messing with you.
Exactly.
Imagine you're telling a friend this crazy story.
Right, and they believe you.
They totally believe it.
And then you're like, come on, I was just pulling your leg.
It's all about that delivery and the tone.
It's gotta be lighthearted.
Right.
Playful.
It's a great way to build rapport.
Yeah, it shows you're comfortable with each other.
Right. But make sure the other person knows you're joking.
Yeah, you don't want to cause a misunderstanding.
And finally, let's wrap up this first round of idioms with burn the candle at both ends.
This is a classic.
This one really captures that feeling of being overworked, stressed out, just exhausted.
Yeah, you're going nonstop.
Think of someone juggling multiple jobs, family responsibilities, and still trying to have a social life.
They're burning the candle at both ends.
It's a reminder that we need to find a balance and take care of ourselves.
We can't do it all.
Right. We need to prioritize well-being
Yeah, set boundaries.
and find ways to recharge.
And relax.
Okay, so that was our exploration of some amazing idioms. We covered skepticism, humor, flexibility, directness, neutrality, ambition, quality, trends, playfulness, and balance.
That was a lot.
It was a lot.
But we did it.
We did it.
And now, are you ready for phrasal verbs?
Oh, I am so ready. Let's do it.
Okay, so let's dive into those phrasal verbs. Let's start with hold off, which basically means to postpone or delay something. Like, we're going to hold off on making a decision until we have more information.
Yeah, it's like hitting that pause button.
Exactly. Giving yourself some time to think things through.
Gather more insights, maybe wait for a better moment.
Makes sense, right? Yeah.
It's a good one. All right, so next up, put someone up.
Okay, this one's all about hospitality, offering a place to stay.
Right. Imagine a friend's visiting your city.
You could say, hey, don't even bother with a hotel. I can put you up at my place.
Such a nice gesture.
It is. It's like making someone feel welcome and comfortable.
Exactly. Now let's get a little more nuance with come down to.
Okay, so this is used to highlight like the essential element of something.
Right, the core of a situation.
Yeah, like if you're analyzing a problem with lots of different factors,
Right.
You might say, ultimately, it all comes down to effective communication.
It's about cutting through the noise and finding what really matters.
Exactly, getting to the heart of the matter.
Okay, so next we got pull through, which conveys this idea of resilience and overcoming challenges.
Yeah, like when someone's going through something really tough.
Right, maybe a serious illness or a personal crisis.
You could say we're all hoping they pull through this.
It's like an expression of hope and support.
Yeah, you're acknowledging the difficulty, but you believe they can overcome it.
It's powerful. Now let's shift gears to a phrasal verb with a much more dramatic meaning: wipe out.
Oh, this one's intense.
Yeah, it usually refers to complete destruction or elimination.
Like think about a natural disaster.
A hurricane or a tsunami.
Yeah, you might say the storm completely wiped out the coastal towns.
It's a strong image. It emphasizes that devastation.
It really does. Okay, so how about a phrasal verb with multiple meanings break into?
Okay, this one's tricky.
It can be.
because it can mean a couple of different things.
Right.
So on one hand, it can refer to illegal entry.
Like someone tried to break into my car last night.
Right. But it can also mean entering a new field or profession.
Yeah, like she's trying to break into the music industry.
That's right. So context is super important here.
Yeah, pay attention to those surrounding words.
Figure out what they really mean, right? Set about.
This one implies a determined and purposeful approach to something.
Like when you're starting a new project.
Yeah, you might say, we're setting about to create a more sustainable business model.
It suggests a clear intention and a plan of action.
You're taking charge.
You're making things happen.
And last but not least for this round, step up.
This one often means taking on more responsibility or rising to a challenge.
Yeah, like in a leadership situation.
Imagine someone volunteers to lead a project when no one else will.
You could say he really stepped up and took charge.
It shows initiative and courage.
And a willingness to go above and beyond.
Okay, round 2 of phrasal verbs. Are you ready?
Bring it on.
Let's do it. Bring on.
Perfect example right there.
I know, right?
So bring on often means to cause something to happen, sometimes with negative consequences.
Right. Like stress can bring on headaches.
Lack of sleep can bring on fatigue.
Eating too much sugar can bring on a sugar crash.
It's all about cause and effect.
Right. Recognizing those consequences.
Okay, next up we have track down, which means to find something after a thorough search.
Like when you're looking for something specific.
Yeah, a rare book or a long-lost friend.
You might say, I finally tracked down that old photo album.
It takes effort and persistence.
Right. You don't give up until you find it.
Determination is key. Okay, so now for a phrasal verb that conveys a sense of gradual disappearance. Fade away.
I like this one.
Yeah, it's got a certain feel to it.
Right, like memories can fade away over time.
Enthusiasm can fade away if you don't nurture it.
And that excitement for a year trend can fade away when something new comes along.
Yeah, it's a reminder that things change.
Nothing lasts forever.
All right, so let's move on to map out, which is all about planning and strategizing.
Yeah, when you need a clear plan of action.
Like when you're preparing for a big project,
Or a trip.
you might say, we need to map out our travel route.
It's about creating a roadmap.
Visualizing those steps.
Anticipating those challenges.
Okay, and when it's time to get laser focused, we use zero in on.
Love this one. It's like narrowing down your focus.
Right, honing in on that one crucial aspect.
Like a team trying to solve a problem.
Yeah, they might say, let's zero in on the main cause of the delay.
You're blocking out distraction.
Concentrating all your energy on that one thing.
You ready for a fun one? Screw up.
Oh yeah, we've all been there.
This is a casual way of admitting you made a mistake.
And usually a pretty big one.
Like, I totally screw up that presentation.
It's okay to laugh at ourselves sometimes.
Right, we're all human.
We make mistakes.
And last but not least, another multi-meaning phrasal verb, lay off.
Oh, context is key with this one.
It is, because it could mean a couple of different things.
Right.
On one hand, it could mean to terminate someone's employment.
Like the company had to lay off workers due to the recession.
Right. But it can also mean to stop doing something or to ease up.
Like, hey, lay off the junk food.
Or lay off the video games you've been playing all day.
So many possibilities.
So many possibilities. Wow, we covered a lot of ground with those idioms and phrasal verbs.
We did. It's amazing how much they can add to our language.
Right. They give it so much depth and color and personality.
I think what's really interesting is how they reflect our culture.
Yeah. It's like getting a glimpse into how people think and what they value.
And their sense of humor.
So for our listeners out there who want to master English, what are some key takeaways?
Well, first of all, don't be afraid to try them out. The more you use these expressions in real conversations, the more natural they'll become.
Right. It's like practice makes perfect.
Exactly. It's like learning a new dance step. It might feel awkward at first, but the more you do it, the smoother it gets.
I love that analogy. And it reminds me, we can't just passively learn these expressions.
Yeah, you got to use them.
We have to actively integrate them into our language.
And another important thing is to pay attention to context. Idioms and phrasal verbs can have different meanings depending on how they're used.
Right. So you have to consider the surrounding words, the tone of voice, the whole situation.
It's like being a detective.
A language detective.
You gotta gather those clues to figure out the real meaning.
So what are some practical steps our listeners can take to really make these expressions stick?
One thing you can do is create your own examples using the idioms and phrasal verbs we talked about.
Okay.
Relate them to your own life, your work, your hobbies.
Make them personal.
Exactly. The more personal the connection, the easier it'll be to remember.
I like that. And what about immersing yourself in authentic English content?
Oh, that's huge. Movies, TV shows, podcasts, books.
It's like surrounding yourself with the language.
And pay attention to how native speakers use these expressions.
It's like getting a free language lesson.
And remember, learning a language takes time.
It's a journey.
There's always something new to discover.
So embrace the challenge, have fun with it, and celebrate your progress.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's been a pleasure diving deep into these expressions with you and our listeners today.
And to all our listeners out there, we'd love to hear from you. Which idiom or phrasal verb resonated with you the most? How are you going to use them in your everyday conversations? Share your thoughts, your questions, and your experiences with us on social media. Let's keep this conversation going and keep exploring the amazing world of the English language together.
Ever get that feeling where a word looks right on paper, but it sounds totally off when you say it out loud? Or like vice versa?
It happens to the best of us.
Oh, yeah. English is full of these tricky word pairs, the kind that make you second guess yourself, even if you've been writing for years.
Absolutely. And it's funny, we're actually diving into some of the most common culprits today. And get this, the examples are pulled from a podcast script on confusing English words for beginners.
No way. Really? You're kidding. For beginners.
Not kidding. But trust me, even if it's meant for beginners, there are some real gems in here, things that'll make even the most experienced English speaker go, oh, that's what the difference is. Like, seriously, I had a few of those moments prepping for this.
Okay, well, I'm intrigued. I got to hear these beginner-level mind blowers. What's first?
Well, I kick things off with words that sound the same. Homophones.
Right, words that sound alike but have totally different meanings and spellings. Okay, so like the classic triplets, right? There, and two, and of course, your and your. I swear those trip up everyone, no matter how long they've been speaking English.
It's almost like our brains just go on autopilot when we hear these words, especially in casual conversation, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
But think about it. How often do you actually see these words written down as opposed to how often you hear them?
Right, yeah. It's way more often hearing them.
Exactly. It's no wonder we mix them up.
So what's the secret? How do we avoid these homophone traps?
The key is to slow down for a second and think about the function of the word in that sentence. Like, is it about possession, like, there? Or is it location, like there? Or is it like a contraction, like there?
That's a really good point. I know I'm guilty of kind of like skimming over those little words when I'm reading and just relying on context to figure out the meaning, which I guess explains why I mess them up in my own writing sometimes.
It happens. But speaking of words that can be tricky, let's move on to the next category in our beginner's guide here. They call this section words that look similar.
Ooh, okay. This is where things get really interesting, I think, because a lot of times those words have completely different meanings, even though they look almost the same.
Right. It's all about those tiny little spelling differences.
Yeah, it's those little differences that really get me, like affect versus effect, or accept versus accept, or, oh, I know, advice versus advise. I swear these are like my personal nemesis. Even with the examples the script gives, I still find myself second guessing.
Yeah, I hear ya. But I think for apt and effect, there's actually a helpful trick to remember the difference. And it's this affect usually is a verb. It's like the action of influencing something.
Okay.
While effect is typically a noun, it's the result of that action.
Gotcha. So like the weather can affect my mood, but the effect is that I feel lazy on rainy days.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You got it. Now, how about accept and accept? Any mnemonics you use to keep those straight?
Honestly, not really. I usually just try to remember that accept means to receive something or agree to something.
Right.
But accept means to like exclude something.
Yeah, that's it. So think of that X at the beginning of accept.
Okay.
To me, that kind of emphasizes that idea of something being excluded, right?
Yeah, I like that. The X as in take it out.
Exactly. So if you're accepting something, you're including it. And if you're accepting something, well, you're leaving it out.
Ooh, I like that. That X really drives home the meaning. Okay, what about advice versus advise? Those two always feel like especially slippery to me.
Think of it this way. Advice, that's the noun, the thing itself. Advise is the verb, the act of, giving the advice. So you can give someone a piece of advice, or you can advise them on what to do. See the difference?
I think I'm starting to see the light here. It's all about the part of speech, right? Noun versus verb. Okay, I'm ready for more word pair wisdom.
Sure.
What's next on the list from our beginner's guide?
Well, the next section is called words that are easy to mix up. And the first pair we're tackling is farther and further.
Oh, yes, the infamous distance dilemma. I always get those two confused.
It's understandable they're very close in meaning, but traditionally, farther is used for physical distance, while further is used for metaphorical distance, or to indicate a greater extent of something. So you might travel farther down a road, but you explore a topic further in conversation.
Okay, that makes sense. But I have to admit, I've definitely seen further used for physical distance too. Is that becoming more acceptable these days?
You've hit on a really interesting point. Because while farther for physical distance is still preferred in, formal writing and all that, further is gaining acceptance for both physical and metaphorical distances in, like, everyday usage. It's actually a prime example of how language evolves.
So maybe the real trick isn't remembering a hard and fast rule, but like recognizing that the lines can be a bit blurry sometimes.
Exactly. That's the beauty of language. It's fluid, it's dynamic, and it's constantly adapting. What was once considered, like, totally incorrect can become perfectly acceptable over time.
That's a great reminder to, like, be open to those changes and not get too hung up on those rigid rules. Okay, what other easy to mix up words are lurking in this section?
Well, the next pair on the list might surprise you. Principle and principle.
Oh, those two. They're definitely tricky. I think I usually get them right, but I can never quite remember, like, the reason why one is right and the other one's wrong.
I hear ya. It's all about understanding their distinct roles. So principle can actually function as both a noun and an adjective.
Oh, okay.
As a noun, it refers to, someone in charge, like the principal of a school.
Right.
It can also refer to the most important element of something.
Okay.
As an adjective, it means main or primary.
Gotcha.
Principle, however, is always a noun, and it refers to a fundamental truth or law or belief.
Okay, so principle can be a person or a thing, and it often relates to something being, like, the most important.
Right.
And principle is an idea or belief.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay, so the principal of a school might uphold the principle of fairness.
Perfect example. You're really getting the hang of this. Ready to tackle some more word pairs?
Absolutely. Bring on the next batch.
Well, the next section is called Words That Have Different Meanings. And it starts with a pair that often trips people up. Emigrate and immigrate.
Ooh, those are good ones. I know they both have something to do with, moving between countries, but I can never remember which is which.
It all comes down to perspective. Emigrate means to leave one country to live permanently in another.
Okay.
Immigrate means to come to live permanently in a foreign country. So it's like two sides of the same coin, the same action, but from different points of view.
Okay. So if I'm focusing on someone leaving their country of origin, I use emigrate. But if I'm focusing on their arrival in a new country, I use immigrate.
Exactly. Like, imagine watching someone walk through a doorway, right?
Yeah.
They're exiting one room and they're entering another.
Right.
Same action, but the perspective determines which word we use.
Wow, that's a great way to visualize it. I think I finally have those two straightened out in my mind. What other perspective-based word pairs await us in this section?
Well, the next one is a classic, lie and lay.
Oh no, not those two. I swear those haunt my dreams.
I know, they can be tricky. But there's actually like a simple trick for remembering which is which. It all comes down to whether the verb takes a direct object or not. So lie means to recline or to rest. And it doesn't need a direct object. So for example, I lie down for a nap.
So lie is what I do when I'm resting.
Precisely. But lay means to put something down. And it requires a direct object. So for example, I lay the book on the table.
Okay.
The book is the direct object, receiving the action of laying.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see the difference. So if you're talking about, like, yourself resting, you use lie. But if you're talking about putting something down, you use lay.
Exactly. You're a natural at this.
Well, I have a great teacher. Okay, ready to move on to the next section?
Absolutely. Let's dive into the last category from our source material. This is common mistakes in everyday English. And the first pair on the list is a big one. Bring and take.
Oh, I know I mix those up all the time. Is there, like, an easy way to remember the difference?
There is. And it all comes down to direction. Bring implies movement towards the speaker or a specific location, whereas take implies movement away from the speaker or a specific location. So if you're asking someone to bring you something, you're asking them to move it closer to you. But if you're telling someone to take something, you're telling them to move it further away.
Okay, so if I'm at the office and I ask a coworker to bring me a stapler, I'm implying that I want them to bring the stapler to me at my desk.
Right.
But if I'm leaving the office and I tell that coworker to take their lunch break, I'm suggesting that they move away from their desk to enjoy their break.
Exactly. You've got it. It's all about the direction of movement,
Right.
Relative to the speaker or a specific location.
That makes so much sense. I'm feeling much more confident about using those words correctly now.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the final word pair on our list of common mistakes? I'm ready for the grand finale.
Okay, for our final word pair from this common mistake section, we're tackling one that's sure to resonate with anyone who's ever, felt the wrath of a grammar enthusiast. Less and fewer. The one that always sparks debates in the comment section of every article online.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those rules that seems like simple enough on the surface, but then you hear people using it incorrectly and you start to question like everything you thought you know about grammar.
I think part of the confusion, though, stems from the fact that both less and fewer deal with reducing quantities, right? But they apply to different types of things. And as our source material explains here, it all boils down to whether the noun that you're modifying is countable or uncountable.
So the classic example is less sugar versus fewer cookies, right? Because you can't count individual grains of sugar, so you use less. But you can count individual cookies, so you use fewer.
Precisely. It's all about whether you can, picture those individual units in your mind. If you can easily count them out one by one, like cookies or marbles or pencils, then you use fewer. But if it's a bulk amount that doesn't lend itself to individual counting, like sugar or water or time, then you would use less.
Okay, that makes sense. So I would say I have less patience for traffic jams these days because patience isn't something you can count, but I have fewer errands to run this week because I can count those individual errands off my list.
Exactly. You're getting the hang of it. Now, what's interesting is that this rule, while technically correct, is starting to blur a bit in everyday conversation. So you might hear people say less people or less items, even though fewer would be, grammatically correct.
So is the language changing right before our eyes? Are we witnessing the evolution of grammar in real time?
It's certainly possible. Because language is a living thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's constantly adapting to the way that people use it. So what was once considered a strict rule can become more flexible over time, especially as usage patterns shift and change. But even if the lines are blurring a bit, it's still helpful to understand the underlying principles of, countable versus uncountable nouns.
Yeah.
That way you can make a conscious choice about how you want to use these words. Whether you prefer to stick to the traditional rule or embrace the evolving language, it's up to you.
That's a great point. It's all about making informed choices as a speaker and a writer. But going through all these word pairs, it's making me realize just how nuanced the English language really is. There are so many subtle distinctions and potential pitfalls.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes it such a fascinating language to explore, right? There's always something new to discover, some new layer of meaning to uncover. Even for native speakers, there are always opportunities to refine our understanding and our use of the language.
It's definitely a humbling experience. I came into this deep dive thinking it'd be a quick refresher on some basic grammar rules, but it's turned into so much more than that. It's made me appreciate the complexity and richness of English in a whole new way.
I'm glad to hear that. Because that's what we hope to achieve with these deep dives, to spark curiosity and encourage a deeper engagement with language, Because ultimately, language is about so much more than just getting the grammar right. It's about connecting with others, expressing ourselves clearly and effectively, and appreciating the beauty and power of words.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today, from homophones to commonly misused words to the evolving nature of grammar itself. It's been a real whirlwind tour of the English language.
It has indeed.
Yeah.
But we're not quite finished yet. We still have a few more word pairs to unpack from our source material, ready to continue our linguistic adventure.
Absolutely. What other word-related wisdom awaits us?
Well, the next section is called Words That Have Opposite Meanings, and it starts with a pair that often causes confusion. Flammable and inflammable.
Those two mean opposite things? I thought they were synonyms.
That's a common misconception. And it's understandable given the presence of that in prefix, which usually means not. But in this case, both flammable and inflammable actually mean capable of easily catching fire.
Whoa. That's really counterintuitive. So why are there two words that mean the same thing?
So the word inflammable actually came first, believe it or not. And it comes from the Latin word inflammare, meaning to set on fire. However, because of that potentially confusing in prefix, people started using flammable as a clearer alternative to avoid accidents,
So it was a safety measure. People were worried that others might mistake inflammable for not flammable and end up in a dangerous situation.
Exactly. Imagine seeing a sign that says inflammable liquid, assuming it's safe to handle. Yikes.
Oh, good.
So the word flammable was introduced to remove any ambiguity and make that warning crystal clear.
That makes so much sense. It's a great example of how language evolves, not just for clarity, but for safety as well.
Absolutely. And it highlights the importance of being aware of these potentially confusing word pairs. especially when it comes to situations where safety is paramount.
So should we just avoid using inflammable altogether then?
It's generally recommended to stick with flammable because it's more widely understood and less likely to cause confusion.
Okay.
However, inflammable is still considered like a valid word, and you might encounter it in older texts or, technical contexts.
Okay, good to know. So the takeaway is to just be aware of the potential for confusion and use the word that's most likely to be understood clearly by your audience.
Exactly. Communication is all about clarity and effectiveness. Now, ready for another word, pair with opposite meanings. This one might surprise you, imply and infer.
Oh, those are tricky. I know they both have something to do with indirect communication, but I often mix them up.
It's a common confusion. The key difference, though, lies in who's doing the suggesting and who's drawing the conclusion. So to imply means to suggest something indirectly without stating it explicitly.
Yeah.
To infer means to draw a conclusion based on something that has been, implied or suggested.
So the speaker or writer implies something, and the listener or reader infers something.
You got it. It's a two-way street of communication. The speaker sends out a subtle message. And the listener interprets that message and draws a conclusion based on, the available information.
Okay. So, for example, if I say, wow, it's getting late, I might be implying that it's time for my guests to leave. And if my guests pick up on that subtle cue and start gathering their things, they are inferring my meaning.
Perfect example. You've illustrated the difference beautifully. It's all about that, subtle dance between what is said and what is understood.
I think I'm finally starting to grasp the distinction. It's all about the direction of the communication, who's sending the message and who's receiving it.
Exactly. You're really getting the hang of these tricky word pairs. Ready for one more before we wrap up this section?
Absolutely. Bring it on.
Okay. The last pair in this category is illicit and illicit. These two are often confused because they sound very similar, but their meanings are quite different.
Oh, I know I've mixed those up before. It's that pesky I versus E difference again.
It's easy to see why they cause confusion, but there's a helpful trick for remembering which is which. Illicit, with an E, means to draw out or evoke a response, usually a positive one. It often applies to, getting information or a reaction from someone.
Okay.
Illicit, with an I, means illegal or forbidden.
So a detective might try to elicit a confession from a suspect, while a smuggler might engage in illicit activities to bring goods across the border.
Perfect examples. You've captured the distinction perfectly. It's all about the nature of the action, whether it's, legitimate or unlawful, positive or negative.
This has been such an enlightening deep dive. I feel like I'm starting to see the English language in a whole new light. It's amazing how many subtle nuances there are, even in words that seem, simple at first glance.
That's the beauty of language, isn't it? There's always more to discover, more layers of meaning to uncover. And the more we explore those nuances, the more confident and effective we become as communicators.
I couldn't agree more. Now, what other linguistic adventures await us in our source material?
Well, the next section is called Words That Are Often Mispronounced, and it starts with a pair that might make you cringe just thinking about it. Nuclear and nuclear.
Oh, no, not that one. Ugh. It's like nails on a chalkboard every time I hear someone say nuclear.
I understand the feeling. It's one of those mispronunciations that really gets under people's skin. But let's dive into the reason why it's so commonly mispronounced, shall we?
Okay, I'm ready for a pronunciation lesson. Hit me with your linguistic wisdom.
Well, the correct pronunciation of nuclear actually involves 3 distinct syllables,
Okay.
Nuclear. The emphasis is on that first syllable.
Right.
And that middle syllable is a clear clee sound, not, distorted cull sound.
So it's all about emphasizing those syllables and getting that clee sound right in the middle. But why do you think people struggle so much with this word in particular?
I think it's a combination of factors, honestly. Yeah. First, that clear sound in the middle syllable can be a bit tricky for, some speakers to articulate.
Yeah.
And then second, there's the influence of similar sounding words like molecular and particular, which do have that cull sound in the middle.
Right.
And then third, there's the fact that the mispronunciation nuclear has become so widespread, it's almost gained a life of its own.
Yeah.
You hear it everywhere, from casual conversations to news broadcasts. And that repeated exposure can just reinforce the incorrect pronunciation, even if you know better.
That's a great point. It's our brains get programmed to hear what's familiar, even if it's not technically Correct. So what's the best way to break free from that nuclear habit and embrace the correct pronunciation?
Practice, practice, practice. The more you consciously say nuclei out loud, the more natural it will become, right? So pay attention to like the way you shape your mouth and your tongue when you say the word. And if you catch yourself, slipping back into the nuclear habit, just gently correct yourself and move on. Over time, that conscious effort will help you like retrain your brain and master the correct pronunciation.
I'm ready to embrace the challenge. No more nuclear for me. Now, what other mispronounced words are lurking in this section?
Well, the next one is a word that often trips people up because of its silent letters. Espresso.
Ah, yes. The beloved coffee beverage. I have a feeling I know where this is going. People often add an extra X sound in there, don't they?
Exactly. The correct pronunciation of espresso is espresso, with the emphasis on the second syllable and no X sound anywhere.
Right.
But that X seems to like sneak in there because people see the double S and they automatically want to make an X sound.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
But remember, those S sounds are separate and distinct.
So it's espresso, not espresso. Got it. Any tips for avoiding that extra X sound?
I would say, like, think of the word express without the X. That might help you visualize the correct pronunciation and train your tongue to avoid that unnecessary X sound.
That's a great tip. I'll definitely be keeping that in mind next time I'm ordering my favorite coffee drink.
Yeah.
Now, what's the final word on our list of mispronounced words?
This one is a word that's often mispronounced because of its tricky combination of vowels. Prerogative.
Ah, yes, prerogative. I've definitely heard people stumble over that one. What's the most common mistake people make?
The most common mistake is switching the E and the A sounds in the second and third syllables. The correct pronunciation is prerogative, with the emphasis on the first syllable. So it's easy to see why people might get the vowels mixed up, especially when, speaking quickly. But paying attention to that syllable breakdown can help you avoid the mispronunciation.
So it's prerogative, not prerogative. I'll definitely be practicing that one in the mirror. Now, we've explored a lot of confusing and commonly misused words today. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to take a moment to reflect on what we've learned. So what are some of the key takeaways for our listeners today?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that language is a complex and ever-evolving system. There are, rules and conventions, of course.
Right.
But there's also a lot of flexibility and room for interpretation.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to approach language with a sense of curiosity and humility. There's always something new to learn, some new nuance to discover.
Exactly. And even when we make mistakes, those mistakes can actually be valuable learning opportunities. They help us refine our understanding and become, more effective communicators.
So the key is to embrace those mistakes, learn from them, and just keep striving to improve our command of the language.
Precisely. It's all about that lifelong journey of learning and discovery. And as we see today, even seemingly simple words can hold, hidden depths and unexpected challenges.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. I'm leaving with a renewed appreciation for the intricacies of the English language and a determination to keep honing my skills.
That's fantastic to hear. And remember, language is ultimately about, connection and communication. So go out there, embrace the complexities, and have fun exploring the wonderful world of words.
Well said. And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this linguistic adventure. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of confusing English words.
Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep playing with language.